So you'll have to undo that on your screen, and when I go live on the
You can see me, right?
yes,
Okay.
you can. That's good. Sorry about that little change right there. And there, whoops.
Oh, there I am.
And I just clicked on go live.
A question, do you want questions during the meeting or not?
He wants questions during the meeting, yes.
Oh, okay.
He'll
Oh,
say,
so,
he'll say that.
oh, okay. You tell me when to go and I will.
Go ahead.
Okay. Welcome to the August 14th meeting of the Utah Valley Technology and Genealogy Group. We're excited to be with you here today. We have some great presentations for you. We'll begin with the opening prayer by Jeannie Inouye.
Our Father who art in heaven, we come before thee in gratitude today, thankful for the blessing of gathering and sharing and increasing our knowledge of how to do our genealogy and how to learn about our ancestors and how to forward thy work here on the earth. We pray that thy spirit will be with those who are instructing us and with each of us, and say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to let you know, next month's meeting, which will be September 11th, we will have Lance McIntosh coming back to reprise the topic he did with us a couple years back, organizing temple and family history in your wards and states. And so it'll be interesting to see what has changed and what his suggestions are now 2 years further down the road than the last time that we saw him. We encourage you to invite your temple and family history consultants and priesthood leaders to watch with us on Facebook, or to remind them that they can go back later and watch that on Facebook. It'll be their best chance to get some really straight advice from somebody who really knows. Thank you. We'll begin having Don Brimhall teach us about Zoom that day also in the second hour. Now, today, we don't have any handouts posted, so if you're looking for something and not finding it, don't worry about it. All you need to do is go to our blog, which is blog.uvtag.org, and there are some links there to some articles and materials that you'll want to check out that are by our speakers today. Our presenters today are Ken and Sheron Drake, and their bio goes like this. They've lived in Linden, Utah for 17 years, raising 4 children. Ken works in high tech, and Sheron has been actively involved in the local charter schools, working in roles from classroom assistant to CAO of the school board. Ken Drake was one of the first adoptees. Get this, I hope you're listening. Ken Drake was one of the first adoptees to connect with previously unknown biological family through Ancestry DNA, through a test. And Ken will share insights from this life-changing event and subsequent discoveries.
Join back in.
Ken's wife, Sheron, who is not an adoptee, will share how she has connected with over 17 previously unknown family members, most of them adoptees, in her own family tree that was previously thought to be complete. I have had a similar experience, and it's pretty surprising. So I look forward to hearing about her experience here. So they'll begin with the main presentation, Secrets in Your DNA. Thank you, Ken and Sheron, for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you. I appreciate those who have made the effort to invite us. If you could enable screen sharing so I can begin the presentation, Looks like I'm not able to do that quite yet. And still not. So while that's happening, I just want to invite everybody to, if you have questions, comments, you can enter those in the chat in the Zoom meeting or in the Facebook group. People will be monitoring that and letting us know if there's anything relevant that we need to address. If you have something that's extremely relevant and a burning question that you really want me to address or talk about, feel free to unmute and open up your video and just participate in the meeting directly. We want to make this as interactive as possible and to be able to address any questions that you may have. It's like I'm still not able to share the screen. Gerhard, so if you want to push the magic button to make me a presenter, that would be great.
Yes, sorry. I apologize. I got a phone call with another problem there for a second.
No worries.
Now you can.
There we go. Hooray. Okay. Which one is which? Hopefully this is part one. Now let's just do this. We'll do it this way. Oh. And if somebody could just confirm that you can see the presentation.
We
It's
can.
up on the screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Fantastic. Uh-oh. You can see it, but I can't. Where did that go? My monitor just went blank. Hopefully you can still seeing it.
Yep.
Okay. Hopefully it's saying don't hesitate to ask questions. Like I was just saying, I want to make this interactive as possible. Great. So why am I here? Well, to begin with, this was my family tree for the vast majority of my life. As an adoptee, born in California in 1964, in a period of time when adoptions were all closed and sealed. I had, even though I knew I was an adoptee, that was never from me kept a secret. I had no knowledge of my family, my biological family at all. In fact, it wasn't really discussed. And that's because one, California had a closed adoption law. California still to this day has closed adoption law. My records are sealed and I have no legal access to my own original documentation. And that's true for the state of California, as well as the Adoption Institute, which was an organization that existed in California back in the day, and they no longer exist. I'll talk about that a little bit as well. So anyway, that was my knowledge of my family, basically zero. So let's talk just briefly about the impacts of adoption, how many people this touches in the United States. In the adoption world, we talk about the triangle of adoption impact. We have the adoptees, we have birth parents, of course, and we have adoptive parents. And so most estimates today put the number of adoptees living in America today at around 6 million. These are people that were adopted or born sometime between 1930 and today and have been adopted out. So that, if you just do the math, simple math, means that there's biologically 12 million birth parents out there and generally another 12 million adoptees. So altogether, the people who are directly impacted by adoption is about 30 million people. Let's see, where did that go? But if we look at the broader impact, 30 million out of, I guess today they released the census the last couple of days, 330 million people approximately in the United States. So we're about 1 in 10 people, 10% of the population who are directly impacted through adoption. If you expand that to the broader circle of sisters and uncles and aunts and grandparents and everything, that's a large cohort of the population who are impacted by adoption and the current state of adoption law as well. In my case, and many people don't realize this, when you are adopted legally, as opposed to going through foster care or an ad hoc type of adoption, when you are legally adopted, you are issued what is considered an amended birth certificate. And the reason for this initially was that the state and the sociologists of the time wanted to help us adoptees avoid the stigma of being illegitimate. And so the state, after the adoption was finalized, would issue what they call an amended birth certificate, not the original birth certificate, but this would act as, this is my legal birth certificate for all intents and purposes. So when I go to get, you know, driver's license or anything else that requires proof of birth, this is the document that I share. And like I mentioned before, I don't have access to the original birth certificate that was issued when I was actually born, because that is a sealed document by the state of California. Now, there are a few issues with having an amended birth certificate today, and let me point out a couple of those. Number one, you'll notice, if I drill into this, that my place of birth, where the hospital is empty, the address is empty, that wasn't included in the thing because obviously the parents listed on this birth certificate, I was not born to them, and so there was no actual physical place. So I had no idea where I was born, other than I knew I was born in California, Los Angeles. Also of note is that clearly my parents, these are my adoptive parents, Shirley and Garland are my adoptive parents, and so it proposes that those are my actual parents. Now, for all legal purposes, they are, but this presents them as my biological parents in the birth certificate for anybody who's, you know, reviewing this. And then finally, the other oddity is that my father, my adoptive father, Garland, never signed the document. Most birth certificates actually have the signature there, or the date it was signed. And then the other interesting thing is the date this was issued, June 9th, 1964. I was born in May 28th of 1964. So this claims to have been issued by the state of California approximately 2 weeks after I was born. However, that's not how birth certificates for adoptees are issued. Again, the way that this used to work, and I think it still works in most cases, is when you are adopted, there's a year-long waiting period. So I was actually, after I was born, I was put into what I think is foster care. I really don't know exactly where I was for the first 3 months of my life. And then 3 months after I was born, I was adopted by my adoptive parents, Garland and Shirley. And then there was a year waiting period for the adoption to become finalized and official. And so after that year-long period, I guess it was you could return me for no full refund if they didn't work out. I don't know how that was. And so a year later, so it was actually August of 65 when the adoption was closed or finalized. And that's when this document, the final birth certificate, was issued. This is an important note, if for some reason the adoption had failed, and I had gone back into the foster care system, and let's say I was never formally officially adopted, I was just became, you know, ward of the state and foster care, whatever, I would have access to my original birth certificate to this, and I would have always had access to it. But because I was formally adopted 15 months after I was born, this document, this amended birth certificate, was issued, purporting to be my actual certificate of live birth. Now, the reason that's important, and Sheron will get into this a little bit later, is that post 9/11, the federal government began to be much more stringent in their requirements for proof of birth. And what we've discovered is that often when adoptees, submit their amended birth certificates to the government for say, get a passport, often, not like in my case. So in my case, you can see that the date of the issuance was claimed to be 2 weeks after I was born, even though I know now that is not the case. So officially, the government backdated the document. They lied about the date of issuance in order for it to appear to be a legitimate birth certificate or an original birth certificate. However, many adoptees have birth certificates, amended birth certificates, that the date is a year or more, like in my case, 15 months after the time that they were born. And what happens now is the government, the federal government, will see that discrepancy in the date, and they will flag that as a red flag and invalidate it as proof of birth. And so we've finding adoptees who are going to go get their passport and they're being denied because they don't have an official birth certificate. It's an amended one. And so we have this strange dichotomy where the states won't let you have access to your original birth certificate, but they have issued an amended birth certificate that the federal government now, in many cases, doesn't recognize as a legitimate document. And so we have, and I've heard stories anecdotally of dozens of adoptees who are in this limbo land where they can, at this point, cannot get a passport because of this strange situation with their documentation. We're not legitimate enough, even though they are trying to help us out and not be illegitimate. And so there is a group that is lobbying to help change some of these laws. Currently, in the United States, there are only a handful of states that allow adoptees access to their original birth certificates, even after you turn 18 or 21. And that this has been a long legislative process because of the way that adoption law is administered state by state instead of federally. We actually have to go and pass legislation in each state individually in order to gain access to original birth certificates. Most recently, and the most significant one recently, was New York City or New York State opened up their access to all adoptees once they reach the age of 18, and literally tens of thousands of adoptees flooded the state with requests to get access. In my case, obviously born in California, that legislation has not passed, although we're constantly lobbying and trying to get those laws passed. Utah as well is very staunchly anti-access to adoptee records. And so we're still trying to help that out. Interestingly, throughout the world, the United States is really the only holdout that has these regressive and antiquated laws about giving adoptees access to their original records. So we have work to do. And so we're always looking for anybody that will help us legislate and lobby in that area. Utah, we have a group in Utah that's trying to pass or create legislation and get it through the process, as well as all the other states here. So looking for anybody that's willing to help at any time, especially if you have access to the government or type of connections. All right, so what did I know? I don't have access to my original birth certificate, but most adoptees have access to, if they request it, what is called, what's the word?
Non-identifying.
Non-identifying information.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is my non-identifying info. This is all the information I had about my birth. So you can see that my name at the time was Baby Boy C3831. That was me. I was a number. And the information that's presented here about my biological parents is just a brief overview. Now, I should note that often adoptees who discover their biological parents and who had access to non-identified information realize that in many, many cases, all of the information presented in a non-identified was fictitious and just completely made up for various reasons. In some cases, deliberately to obfuscate even further the ability of the adoptee to make any contact with their biological parents. Sometimes they just didn't know. The adoption agency may not have any information, so they would just be creative writers and make something up. And so I would say more than 50% of the cases where we've talked with adoptees who had access to this and then discovered later what the true origin story was, have found that it was less than accurate, we shall say. Interestingly, in my case, it was pretty accurate. Here to drive into some. My mom was a young high school student. That turns out to be true. We'll talk about that. And interestingly, even the ethnic origins, Danish, Icelandic, German, Scotch, and English, turns out to be pretty darn accurate. I mean, that's pretty specific, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the DNA ethnicity and some of the genealogy we've done. And then even my father, English, Swedish, and Welsh. So surprisingly, in my case, my non-identifying info was very accurate, although as far as leading to a clue to who those people were, and obviously it's very generic. So 49 years later, February 19th, 2014, I had taken a DNA test. Ancestry DNA began offering autosomal DNA tests back in 2012. And I was, like many of you, interested in technology and family history. And so as soon as I saw that the autosomal test was now available through Ancestry at a reasonable price, I was one of the first people to take the test. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and the timing and how long it took. So anyway, on February 19th, so this was about a year and a half after I took the test, I got a match in Ancestry, a close family match. Prior to this time, even though my test had been in Ancestry for over a year, the closest match that I had in my match list was a 5th to 8th cousin. And of course, without having any information at all about any family in between, making a connection that way, and given the tools at that time, was very difficult, if not impossible. And so I sat and waited. And then, and I should back up just a little bit. So I had taken the test in 2012. Interestingly, and I don't know if this is because this was early days and they were still refining the process. You spend the tube, you send it off. Back then it took about 8 weeks, maybe a little longer, to get your first results. And I get an email coming back to me that says, sorry, insufficient DNA. And I had no idea at that time what that meant. And especially as an adoptee, going, wow, am I human? What do you mean I don't have DNA? I have insufficient DNA. I had no idea what that meant. It was kind of unsettling, to be honest. Anyway, the way that works is that if that's the case, they'll send you a new test. And so you can spit again and resubmit to see if the test will come back better this next time. So they sent me another test. I spit in the tube, sent it off. About 7 or 8 weeks later, I get another message, insufficient DNA. And now I'm really starting to panic, going, oh my word, I don't have DNA. So I did a little more research. Okay, well, what could cause an insufficient DNA result? And I chatted with people in Ancestry and said, okay, well, sometimes you just don't get enough material in the saliva, and you do all these things and make sure you don't eat, and then you scratch bite your cheek. And I did all these little hints and tips and tricks. And actually, I'll admit that it actually took me a few months before I sent the third test in. I was just a little gun shy, I guess, not sure if I was going to get the result that I was looking for. So I sent in the test third time. This is probably now 6 months after I had initially ordered the initial test. Again, takes another couple of months to get the results back. And it was about 8 months after I had initially ordered the test, that I get an email back that says, congratulations, you have DNA. We have some analysis and results for you. So it was kind of exciting that, okay, I went in there and, say, oh, here's your ethnicity. Back in the day, should I wear lederhosen or kilts? And I was, very Scandinavian. Back then, the ethnicities, we'll talk about this a little bit more, the ethnicity results were, this was early days with the technology, so maybe they weren't as accurate as they have become. But it was interesting to see, one, that I had results, and that there were a handful of people who I had a DNA match to. Somebody out there in the world I was related to, which as an adoptee and not being biologically related to anybody, was a kind of a cool thing. But again, because those are all distant matches, the ability to connect was almost non-existent. So I waited. And when I took the test, my estimate with Ancestry is that even after 8 months, when I first got my results, there were probably about 60 to 70,000 other people who had taken the test and gotten results. The pool of potential matches was relatively small at that time, 70,000 people. So the likelihood of me being a biological match to any of those 70,000 people was remote. However, over time, more and more people tested. And in my case, the story was, so I didn't have any close matches, but I knew that my wife, Sheron, had obviously not an adoptee, and had a well-established family tree that we knew, generations and generations back where she came from. I thought, well, it'd be interesting to see how this all works for somebody who knows who they are and knows where they connect, and how does that line up with how well does the DNA validate and confirm a well-established tree. So for Christmas the following year, I got Sheron a DNA test and had her test because I wanted to see how it worked for somebody in that condition as opposed to me as an adoptee. So she took the test in December, right after Christmas. I guess she sent it in January, got her results in February. And I happened to be on a business trip in Chicago. My flights had all just been canceled because of the weather. I left the meeting to go rearrange my flights that I was in, and I was on hold with American Express. If you've ever been in that situation where you have to rebook travel when everything's being canceled and shut down, I was on hold for hours trying to make that happen. So while I'm on hold, trying to get my flights home, I said, oh, what am I going to do? I happened to go log back into Ancestry and just to start look at Sheron's results because they had just come in. And it was fascinating to see how they aligned with what we already knew and the connections that she had. And she'll talk about that a little bit later. But then I happened to just click over here to my results again, just to take a peek to see if anything had changed. And I saw this message: close family match, not a second cousin, not a third cousin, not a fourth cousin. The closest before was a fifth cousin. And all of a sudden I see this close family first cousin match. I had no idea what that really meant. This was a name, Rick Larson, that I'd never heard before, right? So you click into that a little bit more. You see that, when he had created his account, and you can kind of see some of his ethnicity, and mine said Scandinavian too. So I go, okay, well, maybe we're closely related. We have the same ethnicities. Although there are some interesting things here about, European Jewish. But the next thing I did is I saw this, well, you can send a message to this person. So that's what I did. I sent a message. This is the message I sent, right? My name's Ken Drake. DNA shows we're first cousins or something like that. I'm an adoptee. I have no knowledge of or connection with my birth family, so I'm really curious. I was born on this date in Los Angeles, adopted through an LA agency. And I did the typical thing that many adoptees do to kind of backpedal a little bit. So, I'm dedicated to my adoptive family. They are my parents, but I'm curious about my potential medical history, right? Which is a kind of a thing that I find a lot of adoptees do. I look forward to hearing from you. I sent the mail off on February 19th. So 2 days later, the way this works is this doesn't send an email, it sends a message within the system, if you're familiar with Ancestry at all, right? So they have to kind of log in to see the message. However, 2 days later, I got a message back from Rick Larson, the 21st of February, 2014. So this was 7.5 years ago, saying, pretty sure it's 99% that I'm your uncle. My sister, Rayella Larson Bedinas, gave up a baby boy that was born on May 28th. She would like you to contact her if you're okay with that. This is her phone number and her email. Look forward to hearing from you. I got that message while I'm driving down the freeway in Chicago on my way to the airport. And you can't really stop, but my heart stopped for a moment going, oh my word, I just found my mom. So you can imagine that the flight home was a really long flight. My mind is just spinning the entire way back to try to figure out what is this going to mean and what could this be? Who could this person be? And what is this going to be like? Now that I've worked with many adoptees in their reunion process, many adoptees plan carefully the construct around what is that first contact going to be like? If I'm going to write a letter to my mom, and what am I going to say, and how am I going to say it, and how is that all going to go? And they make all these formal arrangements in their mind about how this is going to go to make it just right. I had the flight home, and I should say, in the meantime, while I had seen that message, my wife Sheron, she had also seen the message, and obviously the Rick Larson had got us, and apparently. Because they now knew my name, they had Facebook stalked me and LinkedIn stalked me and gotten my phone number. And Rayella Bodinas left a message on our voice machine that my wife got. So she had the phone number. She knew that they were looking to contact. So literally, this is the funny thing. I walked in the door that night about 10 p.m. from my flight to Chicago. And my wife is holding the phone in her hand and it's pre-dialed with the number. She says, "You need to make a phone call." Just hit go.
I didn't give him a choice.
Yeah, so, not much option for how am I going to do this? What am I going to say? And so that night, February 21st, was my first contact with my biological mom via the phone. And it was a surreal moment, to hear the voice of your biological mother for the very first time. And what do you say? I think we're related, and interestingly, one of the very first things that she said, other than like the typical mom questions, do you have five, are you healthy? Are you normal? Do you have 5 fingers and 5 toes? The thing that any birth mom would want to look at their baby. We'll talk about why she didn't even know any of that a little later. She just wanted to know, if I was a normal person, healthy and happy. But then she asked the most poignant question that really caught me off guard and still to this day makes me think a lot, because she asked me, "Do you know who you are?" And that really struck me. At first, it struck me as funny because I've been looking at this face in the mirror for 50 years. I kind of know who I am. And there's so much potential meaning behind that question. Do you know who you are? Especially as an adoptee. What she meant, though, she didn't mean, maybe she meant some of those profound potential questions, but what she really meant at the superficial levels, do you know who you are? Do you know what your name was? Do you know who I named you? And I had never heard that because, again, sealed adoption, hidden birth certificate. I had never heard that I had a name before I became Ken Drake. Many adoptees, you can see I was baby 38, 31. I had a number, but I did not know that I had a name. And many adoptees discover that for logistics and other reasons that they didn't have a name. They were never given a name, or they are baby, XYZ or something, and never given a name. But in my case, my mom named me after my dad. His name was Richard Harold Bodinas. And that was the original name that I was given. I was named after my father. Now, interesting point about that is that in my case, my mom and my dad, after I was relinquished to adoption, they got married and had other children. First a girl and then a little boy. So my brother, my mom wanted to have a child named after her husband, my father, so much that she gave my brother my name too. So my brother is named Richard Harold Bodinas. We call him Ricky. And so I tease him all the time. Says, I ever find my original birth certificate and I can just use yours because you have the same name, the same parents, same birth location. We're identical except for on our birth certificates, except for the date. He was born 3 years after I was. And I now know that, one, because of my mom told me the story, but interestingly, even though I don't have legal access to my birth certificate, my original birth certificate, it has been indexed. And so if I search on Ancestry and and now that I know the name and I know the date, I know my mom's maiden name, I can go and look and I can see the California birth index that has me listed on my birth date with my name, with my mom's maiden name listed there. So I know it exists. I know I was registered. I know the birth certificate was created with that name on it, but I don't have access to it. So after I made that initial contact with my mom, and I guess I should actually, I did not click the right button to make sure I get a short little video here. So let me just do this really quick. I apologize. I need to make sure that that is selected. Hopefully you're seeing it again. And make sure this works. So this is why I love spit.
We've been waiting a long time
I
for
know.
this.
I know.
Oh my God. You look like one of my kids.
Really?
Yeah. And Uncle Rick even. Yeah.
Really?
My brother. Yeah. Many Ricks.
I know when I look in those photos that you've seen.
I know. We've just been
And I
going
look like-
crazy.
Oh, you said, well, that's not why I'm calling. We sent my dad's DNA into Ancestry for his birthday, and looks like there was a match. And then she goes, we got this message, and she read me this message. And as she goes, I was born in Los Angeles on May 28th of 1964. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, it's my brother. I know it is.
So that was the day I met my mom and my sister. They flew up from California and we were able to meet in person 2 weeks after we had had that initial phone call. You know, and then since then, it's been a whirlwind of emotions and connections, and just the story goes on. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll just pause for a second. Any questions anybody has about any of what we've talked about so far? I just want to make sure everybody's still listening.
It's not a question, but this is just wonderful, Ken. We so appreciate you telling the story.
Well, thank you. It has been a life-changing thing for me. So,
And
Thank
not
you.
just for him, but our entire family.
yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit. It has been an amazing event. All right, so let me talk a little bit about family heritage and genetic mirroring. So, you know, as an adoptee, I grew up never seeing anybody who looked like me, you know, or acted like me. I mean, I was, you know, kind of by myself in that sense. And this is my crazy, weird, hopefully nobody's grossed out by feet story, but I have an unusually long second toe. People say I could play the piano with my feet. That toe is really, it's about as long as my pinky, which is unusual. I mean, I know it's a thing, but after we got together, we flew out to Hawaii to meet, and we'll talk a little about this later. My grandmother, my biological grandmother, was still alive. She was turning 94, and we flew out to meet her, the whole family. And we're in Hawaii, so we're all wearing flip-flops or barefoot, and we're sitting around in a circle just talking about stories. And I just glanced down and started to laugh because everybody in the family had a long second toe, even my grandma. And it was just, sorry, this is a dumb thing. This is such a dumb thing.
It's not.
Right. But I had found my tribe. These are my people. And not only did our toes look alike, but, you know, I discovered them when I was a kid. I had really big ears. I still do. I kind of grew into them finally. But that's a picture of me when I'm about 8. And that's a picture of my dad, my biological father, when he was about 8. He had big ears that stuck out just like I did. And, you know, if I had known that growing up, maybe I wouldn't have been so self-conscious about it, because now I'm really proud that I had those big ears because I know where I came from. And then funny story. So as soon as we discover, you know, that I had a brother. So this is back to the conversation with my mom for the first time. I had no idea that I had siblings. It turns out, like I said, that my parents got married. So I had a full brother and a full sister. Surprisingly, neither of them have had any children. So my mom discovered, and I have 4. So my mom discovered that she was a grandmother instantly for the first time, 4 times over. And she was just thrilled about that. So anyway, the first thing we start doing is many of you with tech will do, what do? We start stalking people. We go, oh, well, now I know my brother's name. He was I had the same name, Ricky Badinas. So I started looking for Ricky Badinas on the internet. And the very first pitch, and you know, my kids and everybody's around me, we're all doing this together. And my brother still is a professional drummer. And this is an early picture from him that somebody had posted on the web. And as soon as we saw this picture with this long, curly, naturally curly hair, my daughter goes, he has my hair. She just squealed that she had found somebody in the family that was just like her. And we knew where it came from. It was just cool. So of course, when we went back to Hawaii to meet everybody, I took advantage of the fact that we're all together here and my daughter's with me. And I said, okay, well, you know, I obviously don't have long hair, but what if I did? What if I grew my hair out? So I borrowed my daughter's hair. You can see her shoulders in the background there a little bit. She's leaning over. I'm taking her hair and obviously his hair is faded a little bit. It used to be kind of reddish, but so that's me and my brother. If I had his beautiful long curly hair, which at this point will never happen, unfortunately, or fortunately. And that was fun. So this idea of genetic mirroring is a really powerful thing among us adoptees. And to be able to see people that look like you, that act like you, that talk like you. In my case, it was so much a surreal experience because, like I said, I never, I actually had an adoptive sister. I grew up, but we were complete opposites.
Sorry, there is a question.
Yeah, and so actually, I mentioned this. So I had an adoptive sister, and we were very, very opposite. And she found her biological family much earlier than I did. Her adoption was a little different than mine. She made the connection when she was a young woman, and in some ways kind of rejected my adoptive parents. And so that didn't go well. And so that was actually one of the reasons why I did not have an active search for my bio parents until much later in life. I didn't want to stress out my adoptive parents. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward as well, about this idea that adoptees, well, now I can see my screen. Hopefully you can see my screen before. Anyway, generic mirroring. So most of you are probably familiar with Family Search and the tools on Family Search. And so one of the things I did is I took my picture and used CompareFace on Family Search, where you can upload your picture and then a picture of a family member, and it will, an AI algorithm will compare the look. And so this is actually on the left, that's a picture of me the day I got married. And on the right is a picture of my dad that I got from my family the day he got married. So he got married a little younger than I did, but we're roughly, the same age, 75% alike in our facial features. And then, of course, I did that with my brother, 87% alike, and my sister, 89% alike facially, and what a powerful thing that has been to, again, see people who look like you. And Sheron will tell you, it's kind of crazy because mannerisms, and it goes way beyond just facial similarities or anything like that. I mean, my sister and I have some weird picky food preferences. My sister has the exact same picky food preferences. Same with my brother, but there's just things that we do. It was, like I say, it's almost like a twin study, right? There were twins who were separated at birth, even though we're not twins, but we were raised in completely different environments, completely different time, separated by 50 years. And there are so many things that we are so similar in. It's just uncanny.
It's crazy to see the mannerisms are so similar. It's almost, it's terrifying. It's just weird.
Yeah. So, and the day that we met my mom and my sister, they flew up here. My brother lives in Hawaii. He wasn't able to join them at that time, but we did FaceTime with him briefly that day. And it was another uncanny experience because I'm looking at him on FaceTime on the computer, and we're having this discussion and just kind of getting to know each other. And the whole time in my mind, I'm having this out of body experience because I keep thinking, he looks so familiar to me. Like I'm trying to place in my mind, where have I run across it? He talked about this later too, because he knew that I existed. I didn't know he existed, he'd been looking for somebody in every airport and every city, anywhere he looked, he was looking for somebody who looked like him. And here I am, trying to think back, have I ever run across this person anywhere in all my travels and in my life anywhere? And then finally I think I mentioned this to you.
Yeah, you did.
And she goes, silly, you haven't seen it. He looks just like you.
Yeah.
And that was I'm watching somebody who has the same mannerisms and kind of facial things. And it was just a weird experience for me to experience that for the first time, as a grown man. I guess, for all of you who have siblings and your parents who look, it's something you just know. It's just natural. It's part of being a family. But as an adoptee, without having that all happen all of a sudden, the gap and the missing of that was very poignant. All right, let's go. So, like I say, we visited Hawaii. That's my grandmother, 94 years old, my biological grandmother on my father's side, and my two aunts on both sides of her. And the only sad thing about the reunion at the time was that I discovered that my father, my biological father, had passed away 7 years before we made the connection. So I was never able to meet him. And he's the one that I wanted to meet as much as anybody else. But that's my kids and my brother and my two aunts and my grandmother on my father's side. And then shortly thereafter, we were also able to meet everybody in the family on my mom's side. So that's my maternal grandmother right there in the middle. And to the right of her is my mom, my uncle right above me, right here. That's Rick Larson. He's the guy who actually spit in the tube that allowed us to connect. And a funny story, I should have mentioned that the email that he allegedly sent in response to my email wasn't written by him. So the reason he spit in the tube is because his 3 daughters, who are here in the picture, 1, 2, and 3, right there to the left of him, they got him the Ancestry DNA kit for Christmas, kind of as a gag, because they didn't know what to get him. So he spit in the tube, but they were administering the kit. So my cousin here in the middle of Daniela, she was the one who was actually saw the initial email that or message that I sent back. And they all work together. So there's a family business. My uncle and my mom and my cousin, they all work at the same family business. And so she literally just saw the email, walked into my mom's office and said, "You're not going to believe what I just saw." And so my mom wrote that email back to me, pretending to be my uncle, because, that was the name that was there. And I had, said, "It looks like you're my uncle." So when she says 99% sure that I'm your uncle, she really meant sure that I'm your mom, but she's just pretending to be somebody she's not, just to make sure that the dots would align there properly. So we've had this amazing family reunion all the way around. So I've met all of my living biological relatives on both sides of my family. Just an amazing thing. This here on the left, that's me and my mom. I discovered where I was born. I was born at a home for unwed mothers in Los Angeles, run by the Catholic nuns at the time, St. Anne's. It's still there, although their mission has changed dramatically. Back in the day, this was kind of a secretive place where young girls would go. In my case, nobody knew where my mom disappeared to. Her parents told everybody that she had gone to live with some relatives up in Oregon. They set up a mail drop so people could still communicate with her via mail, but they sent all the mail to Oregon and back down. I mean, nobody knew where she was for that period of time. It was a complete secret to avoid the stigma and shame, one of having an unwed mother or an illegitimate child. So this is a very typical story back in the day, in the 60s, around adoption and unwed pregnancies. The reason I have a picture of Tommy Burgers there, for those of you who are from LA who recognize Tommy Burgers, so that's Tommy Burgers is a block away from St. Anne's. That's the original Tommy Burgers. That if you walk down the street 1 block, that's where St. Anne's is. And apparently I discovered that while my mom was there for 6 months of her life in St. Anne's, I guess on weekends, they would let them out. My mom's mom, so my grandmother would come take her out and they would go get Tommy Burgers every week while I was in utero. And strange, funny thing is I grew up in Riverside, but my favorite hamburger of all time when I was growing up in California was Tommy Burgers.
And another funny thing is that my parents actually lived a mile away from Tommy Burger.
Yeah.
And they would go there all the time.
And Sheron was born
when I was a baby.
She was born 6 months before me, and she lived just down the street as well. So it's just a crazy, crazy coincidence. All right. So there's so much to say and so little time. And so maybe we'll blend over than some of this, but I'm going to let Sheron talk a little bit about her story. Before I do that, I want to just, like I mentioned, Sheron has a well-established family tree. So they're familiar with the Family Church fan. You can see that, and this is just the first 7 generations of her tree.
And actually, that little blank that you see over on the right by Jane Tonkin, that's been filled.
Yeah. Since we did this initial presentation, so her fan is full. She has a full fan. But when you take it, and for those of you who also have full fans and think your genealogy is well established and well known, take your DNA and start doing some research. You should be prepared for surprises. And the thing that we always warn people about is what we call the NPE, or non-paternity event, or misattributed parentage, right? So people discover, and this happens all the time. The groups I'm involved with on Facebook, literally almost daily, we find somebody who's saying, I just did a DNA test and I no matches on my dad's side. All the matches are on my mom's side. What does that mean? Well, people are finding out that their dad's not their dad, or they find out their grandpa's not grandpa. And surprisingly, genealogists used to believe that the rate of NPEs in the general population was about 2 to 3%. However, anecdotally, if you ask the people at Ancestry support, who get all the calls with people calling in saying, there must be a mistake on my test. I did my test and my dad doesn't show up as a connection. And Ancestry has said that, well, anecdotally, based on the number of calls we get, the questions, we think it's more like 10%. And then there was an interesting study done in London, where at the London General Hospital, often for medical procedures, they do a genetic screening on people to make sure there's not any other genetic issues going on. And when they did this so this is not a self-selected group of people taking ancestry tests. This is just people taking medical tests for medical purposes. And they looked at the results coming back. They also saw about a 10% rate of NPEs in the general population in London. So that's kind of scary. If you think about it, if you've done your family tree and you've done all of your research, imagine for a minute that if you have your tree and there's 130 people on this tree, if 10% of them possibly were an NPE, what would that mean to your tree? What could that mean? What would the impact be? And if this is just a random example, if you had 10% of your tree was an NPE, maybe that much, depending on how far back that NPE occurred, huge chunks of your tree may be inaccurate. And so one of the reasons we say that everybody should do a DNA test is to help validate their already well-established paper trail and paper tree. All right. So in addition to the misattributed parentage, right, you also have even more. You have unexpected parentage, and Sheron will talk about some of these stories. Father who has an unknown child, or donor conceived children, or like me, kids who are relinquished to adoption secretively. Or children who are thought to be stillborn that turned out that they were relinquished to adoption without ever telling the mother. And there's lots of stories about that as well. So I'm going to turn some time over to Sheron. She's going to talk a little bit about some of her adventure in DNA land.
Yeah, this is my great-grandfather. And as you can see, they had 9 children, great-grandfather and great-grandmother, I should say. They had 9 children, one of which is my grandfather, Wilford Lewis Isaac, and 2 of these children passed away before the age of 11. One is an infant and one at 11. And anyway, what I want to kind of throw out there is identify all of your grandparents' siblings. Ask them if they're alive. Use Ancestry or MyHeritage, things like that, social media. Just get to know them and talk to them. And I'm sure you guys have already done that, hopefully. One of my DNA matches, this is an early one, was to, her name is actually Dina Luthi. And I had no idea who she was. I just knew that she had to be my second or third cousin. But when I actually contacted her, I found out that she was my second cousin. And I was able to add her to one of my trees. And this is where she fits in. And she introduced me to an incredible family. These are all descendants of one of my grandfather's brothers. And they invited us up to an Isaac family reunion in 2017. And I absolutely loved it. Loved getting to know them and see the similarities in their faces and who they are. This is Dina, the one that I just talked about. She was, this was the first time that I met her. And in the other picture, this is my first cousin, Armando. And I've been able to get all of my uncle. It was just my dad and my uncle that were my grandparents' kids. And so I've gotten all of them to come up to these reunions now, and it has just been amazing for them to get the influence of this family. This is my dad and his two first cousins that he grew up with and knew them and loved them, but we never knew them. We never, got to meet them when we were little until, now, just recently. This is a rough chart of my DNA matches with just my great-grandparents. All of the orange people that you see are people that I actually DNA match with and what sibling they come under. And this is a really archaic, I guess, way of doing this. Ken has a much smoother way of how to do this.
She does the whiteboard. She does old school.
In my
I'm the
head,
technology guy.
this
I
is
use
what I
technology.
need.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah. And anyway, like I said, this family tree is very well documented and now DNA confirmed. And actually, if you look over on the right, where there are gaps in how DNA was verified on the right, those actually have been DNA verified now.
So that's part of the process, is right? Identify.
Right.
Let's go through each line and let's see if we can DNA validate all of the documents and all the lines that we have. And so
Right.
this was done. Well, I think we did this initial family maybe a year ago.
Yeah.
So since then, she's made progress even on here. So we're closing the gap.
Right. And those DNA verifications on that side have been really miraculous because they are actually from Cornwall, England. And the DNA matches that I have are in currently Cornwall, England. So it's really kind of cool. And, why do you want to get to know your second cousins and, other cousins? They look like you. It's really kind of cool. This is another one of my cousins that I found through DNA. And this was my dad's first cousin, Lulu. And she's the one in the peach with the white necklace on the left. Such a sweetheart. She was the family genealogist, and she actually had my grandmother, it would be my grandpa's sister's genealogy. And she had a book that she had carefully handwritten on every little space of each page, little stories about the family. And I just happened to open it up and look, and there was a story about a copper pot that my grandpa had saved and purchased for my great grandmother for Christmas. And that copper pot is now in my kitchen, which is really kind of cool that I had no idea where that copper pot came from until I met Lulu and realized that that's where it came from. And on the right is my dad and Lulu meeting again after years and years and years. My dad knew who she was when he was really little, but after that, they kind of lost contact. Here was one of my surprises through DNA. Tiffany's mother was adopted. And through DNA, I was able to figure out that she is a descendant of my grandpa's brother. And so it was really kind of cool to meet her and her two little boys. And we've gotten them to go to this Isaac reunion. Here's another one that was another surprise. It was Rodney and his sweet little family. And thanks to my second cousin, I was able to find this picture of Rodney's mother. And this is the first picture he was able to see of his mother. She died shortly after he was born. And, we found that out and let him know. And this woman that he's hugging is actually his aunt. So I was able to introduce him to her, and he got to spend his first Thanksgiving with her as soon as we figured out who he was. And it was kind of interesting when I first connected with him. I wanted to go meet him because I found out he was working at This Is the Place Monument. And so I just went up there. And I walked into the saddle shop where he was working and I said, "Hey, are you Rodney?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I'm your cousin Sheron." And I was not expecting this, but he burst into tears and was so emotional and gave me the sweetest hug. And then he said, "You know, Sheron, you're the first blood relative that I've ever met." And we've been so close ever since. He's like a little brother to me. It's really kind of fun. And this is what he said about it. "You are all my family. Makes me cry. It's so nice to meet you. I'm still trying to put all of you in place. I have yet to get my head wrapped around all this. This is so cool. I trust you like no other." And he trusts me like no other because he actually gave me full access to his DNA. "Here I knew nothing of you, and here you are family and friends whose paths might never have crossed without DNA." And that little girl, his daughter Gracie, is just amazing. He's such a sweetheart. Another one of my second cousins that I connected through DNA with was my cousin Colleen. And I knew Colleen when I was little, but I saw this picture on Family Search and I sent her a message. I'm like, "Hey, this is my grandma. I didn't know you had this." And she said, "Would you like to have the original?" And so she sent me not only the original picture of this, but also of my great aunt that I just absolutely adored. So knowing your second cousins can give you incredible treasures. Now, this is the most hilarious story ever. My dad's cousin Kent, he's my dad's
Right,
first
you have to
cousin.
back up to tell the story a little bit.
Yes, I know. Anyway, I had a DNA match that I had no clue who it was.
So
Bruce-
I'm just going
Bruce
to interrupt
You
and tell
tell it.
some of the story because she looks at my DNA, I look at hers, and I kind of, obviously she has a big family. And over the years, I pretty much know her family tree. I pretty much know everybody, but it's a big tree. There's gaps, obviously, there's people I don't know. So I'm looking at hers and a new match came in. His name was Bruce Johnson. He was a pretty close match to the family. And I'm going, "Hey, who's Bruce?" And she goes, "I don't know." So, and this was just before Thanksgiving a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. And so it's, well, and so we start looking at our tree, no Bruce Johnson's anywhere, no Johnson's anywhere. So we all got together as a family Thanksgiving, and we're all kind of done. And so does anybody know Bruce Johnson? Her dad or her mom, I mean, anybody, does anybody in the family know who Bruce Johnson is? And we're all looking around going, "Nope, never heard of him." So this guy is a mystery, but he's a close family match. I can't remember how many centimorgans he matched you or your dad
Yeah,
to,
he was
but
pretty close.
it was pretty close. Yeah, there's several hundred centimorgans.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later. And so Sharon says, "Okay, well, we need to
We'll figure it out.
So she called Bruce.
Yeah.
Or we sent him an email.
I sent him an email.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Hey, we are pretty close match here. I don't know where you fit in the family. Do you?" And he said, "Actually, no. I went to get my passport and I couldn't get my passport because my birth certificate was not."
So
An
he did
alignment.
not know this, like I said before, he
Yeah.
did not know he was an adoptee.
Right.
He had no idea until the government looked at his birth certificate and said, "No, there's a red flag here. It's
Yeah.
clearly not an original birth certificate. It's an amended birth certificate." He didn't know he was adopted. He didn't know what an amended birth certificate was. It was news to him.
Yeah. And he was so perplexed. He didn't know what to do. So he took a DNA test to try to figure out who it was. He figured out who his mother was, but she told him a name that definitely was not in my family tree. And he said, "Well, that's who she said it was." I'm like,
Who his
"Nope,
father was. Yeah.
that is definitely not your dad." He's like, "Well, how do you know that?" It's like, "I know my family tree really well. That's definitely not in my tree, but I will help you find them." And so I called every single one of my dad's cousins on that line that I suspected and got a hold of Kent on the left and, mentioned to him that I had found this guy and I think it may be your son. And he's like, "Oh, no way, Sheron. There's no way that could be." Kent is 80 years old, never had any children, although, he was married for 47 years. Anyway, he had no children whatsoever. And his sisters always lamented about that and worried about that. But he was okay with it. But I said, no, Kent, I really think this might be your son. He was like, Sheron, there's no way,
So Rebecca, Bruce knew, he discovered where he knew where he was born,
which was in the
the
Philippines.
Philippines, in the 60s.
Yes. And so when I actually called him, I said, Kent, did you have any relations with anyone in the Philippines? And he said,
In the 60s.
he said, and I'm just going to quote it. He said, oh, hell, Sheron, I can't remember them all. And I was.
So when he had been stationed in the
Yeah.
Philippines at that time,
Yeah.
and
So
there was a possibility.
yeah. So I said, Kent, look, would you just take a DNA test to prove him wrong? And he said, oh, yeah, sure. So I sent him the DNA test. And shortly after New Year's Day, I was able to say, hey, Kent, you're not only a father, but you're a grandfather as well. And they only lived 20 minutes apart from each other. And this is what Kent said, finding out I was a father was a little bit disconcerting. But after I met Bruce, it turned out to be very rewarding. We get along very well, and we are together, which is quite often. We chatter away like a couple of teenage girls. All in all, I'm very happy to have found out about my son. And Bruce said it was a bit overwhelmed. I was a bit overwhelmed. Like you said, it seems like a miracle, especially having the ability to see each other often since we live so close. And they still do see each other once a week.
Every week.
Here's another one of my surprises. The lady in the black and white photo with the striped shirt is Therese. She was 85 years old when she DNA matched with me. And within 20 minutes, I was able to find who her birth mother was because I knew my tree like the back of my hand in that area, and was able to also find her birth father because I did find a marriage record, and she was matching with Goldings, which is, his last name. So I knew that that probably was her father, which it turned out to absolutely be that. But what was really cool is I was able to find a brother for her that was still living. And the brother is just turned out to be one of the sweetest men. And he was one of my cousins as well, but I had never met him, had no idea who he was until I found her, called her and said, I think I found a sister for you. He said, oh, my mother would never be like that. She would never relinquish a child. I said, I understand that, but would you be willing to do a DNA test? And he said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. But he said, well, would you send me a picture of her? So I sent him a picture, and he called me right away, and he said, I don't even need a DNA test. I know that's my sister. So it was really amazing for him to be able to meet her. He actually met her in ICU at the hospital. She had had a heart attack and was able to meet her just before she passed away, which was really a special thing. The lady that is holding the little sign by the Henryville sign is Shauna, and Shauna is her daughter. And she now has an uncle that is very interested and helps her out in her life, which is really kind of neat. And this is what Jeff said. My experience with DNA had a profound effect on my life. New doors were opened for me, and I was able to find answers to some questions I had my entire life. I discovered that I had another sister, and although she passed away shortly after I was able to meet her, I was very fortunate to connect with some great new family members. This whole experience has been a positive addition to my life, a new beginning. And one of the sweet things that Jeff mentioned to me, we were sitting in my kitchen. He said, Sheron, I really feel like our great grandpas are right here in this room with us. They're so excited that we connected. And if I was ever to join any church, it would be the Mormon church because of you. And I said, man, I hope you would never do that because of me. Do it because it's something that you want to do. But anyway, and these are just a few stories. Every story is just unique and amazing. And 17 adoptees have been able to connect with their birth families because of my tree. So, and because I did my DNA, which is really kind of neat.
Well, thanks. Let's do a quick time check. Time's going by really quick, and we've got a whole second half and some more even in this half. So do we want to do a quick bio break? Pause? How do you want to?
Let's do that, Ken. You might want to know in Facebook, we had someone mentioned they had just met their second cousin, same age as she, and they had a lot of stories to share with each other, just like you have talked about, Sheron.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead, Laurie, and end this, and we'll take a break and continue in the second hour.
Great.
Thank
What is
you.
it, 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Laurie?
about 5 minutes. So Ken and Sheron, thank you very much. And I think that there's nobody that's planning on not listening to your second hour at this point. Thank you very much. And are there any questions for right this second? Is that what you wanted to do, Gerhard?
I don't see any questions.
Well, there was one from Marilyn, I noticed.
Yeah, we
well,
actually.
They responded to that.
And we'll address
okay.
a little bit more
Yeah.
about that in the second hour too. But yeah, so let's take the break and we'll just
Okay.
pick back up in 5 minutes.
Thanks, everybody. And just keep in mind what our main presentation is going to be next month with Lance McIntosh. Thanks.
By the way, those of you on Facebook, we'll be coming back with the second class shortly after we end this. For those of you on Zoom, please stay on. You can chat a moment while we reset for the second class.
Ken and Sheron, that's just been wonderful.